Okay, so I was thinking that I would share because I'm writing a book series. Um, I'm working on the fourth book of the series. It's not finished at all. I haven't even written it yet. I just have this kind of outline, but I I wanted to bring this up because this fourth book is kind of the unification, I guess, of the previous three. Um, and it's more concerned with, first principles and that kind of thing. So I figured it would be more productive to start from there and maybe move, descend downward, and we can talk about economics or whatever else. So let me see if I could double this somehow. Okay. So can you see or should I zoom in? Let's see.
I would do the single. Yeah, there we go.
Single
Perfect.
page. All right. Yeah. So really, I guess we're going to talk about first principles and then we'll get into economics and, the culture stuff, all the other things that you've been talking about recently on your channel.
Yeah.
So, so the fourth book in the Schism series, it's going to be a kind of a historical book. In basically, my idea for this book is to take what I've laid out in the first three books and then kind of go back through history and engage with history through the lens that I've established. So I guess the terminating point of the book is going to be about um, AI or artificial general intelligence. And not that the book is about that, but AGI is an expression of, I would say, like the final expression as far as, our progress has gone of what I'm talking about. So the central claim in the book, I'm sure you've heard of the alignment problem. Um, and for me, I've been thinking that the alignment problem is fundamentally the problem of evil um, in a different medium. So it's within a technological medium. But when when I hear all these researchers and engineers talking about, we have to have better alignment for our models, this and that, um, something about that just doesn't sit right with me, I guess, because it's assuming that if we give the correct input to the system prompt of whatever model or artificial intelligence that we can have the outcomes that we want from it. Um, so bear with me, like all this is very preliminary, I guess. And then
Well, also, just are we going to cover Schism of Vienna? Because
yes,
okay, cool. Because yeah, I'm not familiar with the
yes,
the
we'll
details of it.
we'll cover the Schism of Vienna. The reason I didn't want to open with that is because I feel like if I start with the Schism of Vienna or the other two books that um because really all the books are one argument, I guess, and it's being made through different um, registers or different levels of analysis or whatever you want to say. Um, but really, I want to talk about first principles because that's what generates all the downstream commitments. So, like when I told you in the message that um, I don't think you can coherently be a Christian or claim to be a Christian, and not you, but just anybody, and also hold the position that the state has a responsibility to um, redistribute things, capital or anything like that. Um, so let me see. How do I start this? I guess. Well, I guess I want to ask you, like, what? Because I heard you in your last video. Um, what is the common good? I guess for you, of
Mm. Well, it's hard to define,
course.
um, and in some sense, defining it, you can't define it entirely. But the common good is. the um, I mean, the ostensive definition, the example is like when a team wins in a victory, that that victory is shared amongst a team, and it's not like a fixed resource where it's divided amongst people, right? It's just there is a collective, and there is a good that is achieved, and it is equally participated in by all the people. And so, um, I mean, my sense is there is something there like that for society, like a well-ordered, society that balances individual freedom with responsibility. It's a very vague concept. Common good is a Catholic social theory term.
Mhm.
You may or may not. Yeah, and I don't know it that well, and I actually want to learn more about it to understand how they define it. So right now, it's really just a vague sense in my mind, but it is something, clean streets and norms that facilitate community, things like that.
Right. And I would agree with that. Yeah, I don't know the technical Catholic definition of it either. My wife, for the record, she's a cradle Catholic,
Cradle
and
Catholic, that's right. Yep.
yes, I'm not. I will, I am going to take my catechumen or whatever
Nice.
this year, so that will be me. But so yeah, the common good. I agree with what you said. Um, so I guess my next question is the common good something that is discovered, or is it something that is engineered? Like, is it something that we choose, or is the
Mm.
common good, as does that exist prior to human will?
These get into like ontological and epistemological questions. It's sort of like it's both. It's discovered and it's kind of both because it's like if you're trying to build a bridge,
Hmm.
there is before you've even built the bridge, a priori, an ideal bridge to be built, or at least a set of potential ideals,
Hmm.
and what you are engineering according to that ideal. Um, and so the common good, I would imagine, is something like that. Like, given there are people, there is some ideal common good, and we engineer towards it. But there's a lot of leeway, and there's sort of different variations of the ideal, but there's some consistency across it. That's what I would think.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. But so there is something that, at least there's a part, an aspect or whatever of the common good that exists independent of the human beings trying to achieve that in their society. Would you say that's true?
Maybe I generally don't subscribe to the idea that anything exists independent of conscious minds to apprehend it. Like that gets into a whole other kind of thing.
Okay.
So I
Well,
wouldn't
I
know, like the
I think
law,
I would agree with that too. Um,
but like you mean like the like is like the laws of logic? Like the laws of logic, do numbers exist outside of human beings? It's like yeah, but our perception, but the intelligibility of the universe, the numbers reflect may not exist without a conscious being to apprehend it. So it's not clear to me at the most deepest levels.
right. And I would say I share that
Yeah.
uncertainty, because in a sense, like, I mean, we both, have engaged with Carl Jung to, I'd say, a substantial degree. And I think if you take Jung seriously enough, then you do come to that point where, well, consciousness seems to be primary. You know, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to see it, does the tree even exist? Kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's all kinds of scientific evidence or scientific argumentation made on behalf of this argument from like Donald Hoffman and something Chalmers, this guy's name.
mhm,
These are like, credible scientists, not mystics like Jung.
mhm. Um, yeah. So yeah, I would agree with that. I guess, because I'm trying to think about how I, you know, leap into the books, because, well, I'm a little nervous, but um,
There's zero pressure. And
No, this is high stakes, man.
this is high stakes.
This is high stakes
That's
for
fair.
sure.
Well, anything can be refined and elaborated on in the future as well.
Right. Well, this is partially why I wanted to talk because, I've written all this stuff, which comes from years of my own thinking, and however good it sounds to me, however much it makes sense to me, um, if it doesn't make sense to at least one other person, then
Doesn't
I
really
can't.
make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right. On its face, yeah, I understand how it doesn't make sense, but hopefully we'll make that a little more clear.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Well, just hit
so
me. Go with your intuition on what the first thing to bring up is.
see, I've been thinking about that all week, all week. Well, I guess if we want to start at the Schism of Vienna, so that book was me putting together the diagnosis of what I think happened or is wrong with our culture. So the book opens with, can I share that? Let's see. Share screen.
And one clarifying question: when you say this is
Yes.
your diagnosis, is this like based on the primary evidence that you've seen? You're coming up with this insight, or are there other people making similar arguments to you that have inspired your work?
Well, I would say that there's definitely people who have inspired the work, but as far as I can tell, there hasn't been somebody who connects these different topics in the way I have, particularly the monetary element.
Okay.
So there's similar criticisms of modernity from, um, McIntyre and all these other people, but something that I never understood personally is like the disconnect of like what people value kind of morally and you know um, other areas of life, and then how that connects to economics, because economics always seemed like it seemed like just kind of math, weird equilibrium models and whatever else. It didn't seem like, I don't know, it didn't seem like it was an alive subject in a way, um, and that kind of bothered me. Not really sure why, but so I'll just say, like, I've studied Jung for many years now, and I've only come to understand Austrian economics within the last couple of years, so like late 2024. And when I had found that out, read Mises and read Human Action and all of that, all the others, Hayek and so on, it just kind of hit me like right in the chest, like in a very similar way that reading Jung for the first time, affected me. And I know people have problems with, a priori deduction or whatever, and I guess we could talk about that. But so for the Schism of Vienna, as I started just looking into the history of how we got to where we are economically. Well, let me say this: when I wrote this first book, I thought that was going to be it. I read Human Action. I read Rothbard. You know, pretty much all of his books, and I was thinking, I was like, well, why does nobody write treatises anymore? Because that used to be like a common medium, like a grand kind of treatise. John Maynard Keynes wrote one, The General Theory, but nobody does that anymore. And I was wondering, well, why not? And I guess because in order to write something like that, that presupposes an underlying um, intelligibility that I think us in the modern day don't really share. Like everyone's so fragmented. So even if you did write one, then it probably wouldn't make sense anyway, because the shared assumptions about the world, they're they're not there. Um, so that was my motivation for writing, and um, getting into the actual part one, I guess. So it starts in 1913, or 1913 is kind of the hinge point for the modern arc, I guess. So 1913, we have the separation of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, which had been, developing over a few years before that. And similarly, we had the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in December of that year. And once I had known that Carl Jung and Freud separated that year, and then after discovering the Austrians, reading about the Fed and all that kind of stuff, and it kind of stuck out to me as like, well, that's kind of odd that there was these simultaneous, you know, fractures, I guess, with Jung and Freud, and then I would say the old classically liberal guard of America, of Western civilization, and the progressive movement and all that sort of thing. So that stuck out to me. Um, so how to connect this? Well, I don't really want to go chapter by chapter. I don't really know how to
No, that's fair. Pull whatever
talk
you
this
think is
stuff out.
relevant.
So yeah, I went through that, and well, because mostly like I'll say this, like growing up, um, my grandfather, he's 69, almost 70 years old. But I remember being, 7 or 8 years old, and he would tell me stories about when he was a kid and this and that, and things were so much cheaper back then, and it was really hard to imagine like how things could only cost, a nickel or a penny. Um, and if you go back even further, we used to have half pennies, if you could believe it. But I always remembered him talking to me about, the world that he grew up in. And, I didn't know this as a kid, but he would pull out, like, he had a old silver certificate. So in the 50s to 60s, we were technically on a gold standard with Bretton Woods, but gold was illegal to own for the American citizen still. So they had silver certificates instead. So you could turn in your dollar, you get $1 worth of silver. Um, and I remember he would tell me about the gold standard. I was like, well, why would we stop? Why would we stop doing that? You know, and it didn't even, that thought just kind of sat in the back of my head. I didn't really consciously think about it at all until, all this time later. Um, so basically it just got me thinking, well, what kind of society chooses to, because the gold standard it was not created in like a managerial sense. It was something that emerged naturally through exchange,
Mhm.
and it also emerged across the entire world independently. So societies that have no contact with each other, um, they all converged on gold and silver. But so the point is that, the monetary system up until World War One was something that was received, if you can accept that term, it was received by human beings rather than administrated. And
Hence an
now,
archetype.
yeah, sure, yeah, like an archetype.
I saw that was one of the
Yeah, so
chapter headings, right? I mean, that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
all
archetype.
humans converged on it. Yeah.
So in chapter 10, well, the Schism of Vienna. So the first part starts like I go through the history. So like we go through the Federal Reserve creation, the Freud-Jung split. We get into Weimar Germany a little bit, and then in the middle of the book, I figured if I'm going to, because I will say I started this book as a plea, I guess, or like trying to make an argument for the gold standard that maybe hadn't been made before. And I remember thinking, well, I know that there's a bunch of symbolic resonance, a whole, symbolic layer to explore, but there are people out there who reject that kind of thinking outright. So I had to make an argument as well based on something that they could not ignore. So the whole middle part of the book is like having to do with the physics of things. I get into, well, I saw in the video that you put, where Ian McGilchrist is like slightly, you know, criticizing capitalism, which is funny because I use his his work to, I don't want to say defend capitalism because that's not really what I'm doing, but um, I use that the left right hemisphere hypothesis to,
Neurotheology is a great term.
right, I thought that was a good term. So yeah, so if we want to use McGilchrist for a second, um, so for me the dispute economically is not really about interest rates or reserve requirements or this or that. It's well, let me put it like this. I think that all arguments, no matter what they're about, fundamentally are about the nature of God. So whatever you think you're arguing about, what that terminates in is some assumption about reality itself that you are, you know, consciously or otherwise bringing to the table. So the question for me is like, what kind of society values um, restraint, durability, permanence, and what kind of society chooses to abandon that? So that's where I use McGilchrist here, and let's see if we can, if I can summarize some of this really quick. So I'm sure the right hemisphere for him. Well, the hemispheres themselves, it's not one does like creativity and one does
Yeah, yeah.
logic. It's more like the right hemisphere. Um, it's about different ways of seeing the world. So the right hemisphere perceives the whole. The left hemisphere is good at manipulating abstractions, that sort of thing. And he uses, I believe, the term map and territory, which I borrow here. So for me, the rejection of the gold standard and the rejection of higher meaning in psychology, which would be the Freud kind of, um, higher meaning is not really a higher meaning. It's like maybe it's a repressed drive or
Yeah,
some
it's
kind of
all
sublimation.
it's all
Yeah,
sex and libido drive, right? That was the source of their split, right?
right, right. So Jung thought that the libido was kind of a general creative life force, not necessarily tied to sex, but could also tie into that. Where Freud really, that was the split, is that he really thought that the sexual theory was the base of most of our psychology. So for me, like seeing that kind of reductionism in psychology maps almost perfectly on the kind of reduction of what money is into something that is merely administered and managed rather than something that is given, something that has an independent reality, or maybe points to
Mm.
something else that has an independent reality. So
So,
that's what, go ahead.
well, real quick. This is I'm tracking what you're saying because in my mind it's like, okay, like the idea of gold as an archetype. Okay, that makes sense. That emerged independently, cross-culturally, as there's something valuable here. And then we got off the gold standard.
Mm,
So we went from the archetypal right brain, we know this is the reality we live in. This is the broader pattern that we're immersed in,
mhm.
to this abstracted mathematical monetary system that is not based on the archetypal mystery of the value of gold.
Mhm.
It's now like a formulaic type thing. Or I don't know exactly how fiat currency works
Right.
in
Well,
any significant detail.
so the whole idea And I guess I'll start with like the creation of the Federal Reserve itself, which um, was created as a response to the Panic of 1907. Um, and the Panic of 1907 wasn't really banks per se. It was more like there was a lot of trust companies. Um, but what happened in that episode is that, you know, there was all kinds of failures. And I think that the 1907 panic was the last, like, truly free market response. And I think it's actually the most appropriate response because what happened to that is that JP Morgan, the man himself, he he took all these, heads of the trusts and heads of banks that were failing, pretty much everybody, locked them in his study and kind of said, okay, we're going to figure this out. We're going to see which one of you guys, has a chance at being saved or whatever. We give you liquidity or whatever, and which ones are going to have to fail. So he did that, and he I don't remember the exact figure, but he put up a substantial portion of his own fortune to stabilize the system. And to me, that's a moral act because instead of because what we have now, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, they are the lender of last resort. Okay, and that 1907 panic is what created the necessity in the American spirit for a lender of last resort, especially because the people in Washington, they saw what JP Morgan did and they thought, well, no one person should have this kind of power to, you know, our financial system cannot hang on the goodwill of one person,
Are they
which
right
I
about that? Because what if JP Morgan didn't do that or didn't have the moral will to do that?
right, right. Um, so I'm not saying that the fear is misplaced. I think the response, what they did, was misguided. Um, but if you're asking like, well, what if he didn't do that? Well, then probably a lot more of those trusts would have been bankrupt or whatever. It's hard to say. Um, but for me, like the fact that the system, and we'll get to why the system itself was fragile in a moment, but the fact that it was fragile and that it required some kind of saving and that saving came from a private individual who had demonstrated, I'm not making a moral, I'm not elevating JP Morgan morally like he was some great man, like a saint or whatever, but the fact that it did have to come from a private person, to me, makes the whole episode legitimate, right? Because it wasn't through taxpayer money. Um, there was no banking holidays, nothing like that. But so the reason that the gold standard was unstable is not because of gold itself. Largely, it's due to the ability for commercial banks to create money through deposits. So, fractional reserve banking, you've probably heard of it. Um, Now it's called endogenous money creation. So, if you deposit your money at a bank, and I'm sure you've heard this, the bank can take, 90 cents on the dollar, loan it to somebody else. It doesn't really work that way anymore. But fundamentally, new money is created through the act of depositing with a commercial bank, or it's created through the act of the bank lending. So the bank will literally lend money that doesn't exist, and therefore there's new claims because you have to remember when we're on a gold standard, each dollar that's circulating in the economy is a claim ultimately on the treasury, on the Federal Reserve or whatever, because each dollar is redeemable for gold. So, when things are good and stable, there's no pressure. Banks can create credit, they can do all this stuff, and things kind of work fine. But when there's, external pressure or internal pressure, recession, this kind of thing, then suddenly um, there's a high demand for the gold, and there's not enough gold because there's too much paper or too much credit circulating in the economy. So the response to 1907, instead of saying, hey, we should move to 100% reserves, which would mean that instead of deposit banking and credit creation being kind of intertwined, 100% reserves means that those two things are separated. So for every dollar that's deposited in a commercial bank has to be held 100% in reserve at the bank. So if we were on a gold standard, that would mean for every dollar that you deposit at the bank, they would have to have that amount in gold.
Yeah.
Which would mean that the ability for commercial banks to create credit is restricted, right? Because now they can't take your deposit and rehypothecate it and do whatever they want with it. They would have to. So like if you wanted a 30-year mortgage in 1905 or whatever, let's say we were on 100% reserve standard, that means the bank would have to find somebody else in the economy who's willing to put their money away for 30 years into a CD or whatever to back up your mortgage. So that puts a limit on the ability for banks to create credit. And if we had 100% reserves, there would be no bank runs. There would be no bank runs. There would be no inflation. And not in an absolute sense, because obviously there's, we could discover large deposits of gold, yada yada. But as far
Mhm.
as there's no artificial inflation, right? Because the reality of existing back then is like, okay, let's say that there was a bunch of inflation, prices are going up. Well, people get kind of uncertain about the stability of the economy. So what do? They go to the bank, they turn in their paper currency for real money, for gold, and that extinguishes, the outstanding liabilities circulating in the economy. Price level falls back down. So, the price the price level from 1792, the first coinage act, up to 1913 was effectively zero. Now there's periods of volatility, of course, but the gold standard ensures that people can't raise prices forever because there's actually just not that much money to raise prices.
Um, I want to ask you about the trade-offs because yes, either be inflation and no bank runs. But to your point about the mortgage thing, it does seem like it's better that we can provide mortgages and we don't have to have people put their money away for 30 years.
Right. Well, yeah, it seems better. But I would say that the fact that we have to take 30 years to pay off a house is also a problem, and that was, FDR kind of made that the standard with the Federal Housing Act, in the 30s. That's when the 30-year mortgage was institutionalized. But really, it would be better if we didn't have to take out a mortgage, or maybe it only took 15 years to, you know, tie up your money or whatever. Because I mean, if you look at um, cars like during the peak of American manufacturing was something like 30 or 40% of your yearly income. Um, and now it's closer to 60, so but as the other thing about home ownership is that when we're on the system that we're on, um, because how do we keep this system stable? Well, we keep this system stable by debasing the currency at a targeted 2% per year. That's their golden rule that they've had explicitly since the 1990s. Um, so 2% inflation, because the idea is that, well, if we dilute purchasing power just enough where people won't stuff it under their mattress and they'll go out and spend it, then we can keep economic growth, going. Um, and in theory, I guess maybe that sounds like it'll work, but I mean, you just have to look at the actual history of what's happened since abandoning the gold standard, and it's it's more of a that's more of a wish than actual reality. Um, so I'll say this, like, because another thing that people bring up is like, well, we have all this stuff now. Like we have central air, we have indoor plumbing, technology is better. We have personal computers now.
Right. When you buy a car, you're not just buying four wheels and a driver thing. You're buying like a computer on a car. So what you're buying is not actually the same. You are getting something qualitatively different.
Right. Which is true. Like things are better now, but the problem with that is that that kind of thinking implies that the debasing of the currency is necessary for technological progress. And we know that's not true because the period of the hardest money was when we had the Industrial Revolution. That was the peak of the classical gold standard. And we had the most rapid economic expansion in human history. That is when, you know, global poverty really started to collapse because, you know, before the 20th century, like 95% of the world was in poverty. And that all slowly eroded as, you know, the 20th century went on, especially now into the 21st century. But just on a technical point, like we know that we don't need currency debasement for growth or for progress because the period of the most progress in absolute terms happened under the period of the hardest money. Um, but as far as that goes, it's here. Let me pull up this number anyway because I think a brand new car, you know, and this is an American car, fully manufactured domestically, the entire supply chain, whatever. It was maybe like, well, let's see, 1963 Chevy Impala, new price. So if you wanted a 1963 Chevy Impala, that was about $2,600. Okay. And then, so if we had what's a new car cost right now? Like a nice new car, like 40 grand, 30 grand, something like that.
Yeah.
But you have to remember $2,600 in 1963. Now it's a little complicated because, like I said, until 1974, gold was illegal to own for Americans. So from when FDR confiscated it in 1933 up to 1974, 40 years, you could not have gold except in, you know, jewelry, but no gold coins, no gold bullion, anything like that. But before 1971, the dollar, in theory, was redeemable by foreign central banks, foreign governments at $35 an ounce. So that brand new Chevy Impala in 1963 was 74 ounces of gold. Okay, so 74 ounces of real money. So even if you took, you know, $40,000, a $40,000 car, and what's gold now? Gold's about $4,000 right now. That's 10 ounces of gold. So for how much cheaper things appeared, um, well, let me say this: for how much technology and, you know, that kind of progress that we've made now, if a new car now is only 10 ounces of gold, um, how do I say this? Effectively, we've had the falling prices taken from us because that's what inflation does, right? So in
Oh,
real
I
in
see what
real
you're saying.
terms,
I see.
yes,
So I see because it used to cost 74 ounces of gold, and now it costs 10 ounces of gold. And so, in theory, that would mean you're paying less for a better car, but because of
yes,
inflation, we're paying more.
we're paying more for a better car, you know, but the fact that we don't need the inflation to get the better car, right? That's something that
Yeah.
gets lumped in with this whole people who, you know, defend the modern system. It's like, well, you know, we need the inflation in order to get this stuff. It's like, well, that's not true. But so all the for the price level to inflation just steals the productivity gains that the real economy has, and it redirects it to people who are closest to the money printer. So it's like when you say, or other people say, like like all these modern capitalists like Chamath, whatever his name is, this and that, I would say Elon Musk is probably the person who's like closest to an old, like Henry Ford kind of
Rockefeller, yeah.
yeah. So besides him, I guess, like all these other people, like especially the Wall Street, all the financial bullshit, Ken Griffin, all these hedge funds, it's like these people love what's going on right now because they're the ones who are closest to the new money. So what inflation does is it allows whoever has the new dollars to buy things at yesterday's prices, because eventually prices are going to go up. So whoever's closest to the money printer, that's Washington, first of all, they create new money first, they spend it on whatever they want. They are redirecting real resources away from the rest of us, and they think that they have some kind of special privilege that they get to do that. And when I hear people complain about, you know, inequality, and that's not to say that there was no inequality under a gold standard. Obviously there was, but at least under a gold standard, especially one that's sound, if there is inequality, at least you can be sure that the inequality is not from, some kind of
Financial
lobbyist.
instrumentation.
Yes, it's not from manipulating finances,
See,
this and
yeah,
that. It's actually earned in some way. So maybe you don't like it. Maybe you're still, and not you, but maybe you're still, a Marxist or a leftist, and that's still a problem for you. But at least for the rest of us, when we look at that, we could say, well, they didn't get all that money by just by doing a bunch of bullshit
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah.
with finances. So that's one. Um, I'm trying to think where else to go. Like this hour's gone by so quick, and there's so many things I want to talk about.
I, I, I want to let you take me where you want to. I have questions I can't ask,
Sure.
um, but it's up to you. Because if you got a train of thought you want to pursue, and hit the main things, because my questions are kind of all over the place and disparate.
Right. Right. So I'll say one more thing about
Mm.
economics, and then we can move on to the other areas if you like. So it's true that we have unprecedented access to consumption in the modern time, and that is a real, achievement, But when people complain about the effects of capitalism or the current system, what they're really complaining about is a lack of access to ownership. So the affordability crisis in housing, in healthcare, whatever. But especially like real assets, like young people are systematically locked out of, you know, having a normal life that, our grandparents had. And the reason for that is because of inflation. Because if you think about it like this. Oh, I actually might be able to pull it up. A nice interactive, let's see, interactive infographic or graph or whatever. Let's see
Nice.
here.
Nobody loves infographics more than I do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Nobody loves PowerPoint more than I do.
I love a good PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay. Uh, can you see it? Okay, there we
Yep.
go. So this is purchasing power in gold from 1900 to 2026.
Can you zoom in on that by any chance? Does it let you? Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
perfect. Keep going.
All right. So
Cool.
I have all different categories of wages. So we have
Did you
unskilled
make this?
laborers. Well, I ran it into a. I'm not a coder. I ran it into a thing. And I gave it the data, and it
Nice.
spun it up for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's different, wage brackets here. So let's look at an unskilled. my mouse double clicks. So we'll look at an unskilled laborer. So in 1905, this is pre-Federal Reserve. So there's no central bank. They just passed the Gold Standard Act of 1900. There's no World War I yet. So as far as things are going, this is pretty much the peak of America, I guess, before all the world wars.
From a monetary point of view.
Well, monetary and economically. So America
Okay.
surpassed Great Britain in the 1890s economically. So for all the people who think World War II made us the great superpower, that's not true. We were the superpower before World War I. Okay. And you have to remember, back in this time, we had the highest wages in the world. We had the lowest prices in the world. And we made the best quality things in the world. So it's usually like that, whatever triangle it's like, you can have something cheap, you can have something fast, or you can have something,
Quality.
good quality, but you can't have all three. We had
Yeah,
all
pick
three.
two.
We
Interesting.
had all three. Okay, so in 1905, an unskilled laborer, so this is like just Joe Schmo working at a factory, just, nothing but his hands. They made about $400-ish per year. In gold terms, that's 20 ounces, about 21 ounces.
Okay.
And if we go over here to 2026, here, let me pull up this other line here. So this is the median wage worker with a full benefits package. Okay, so this is like what, 70, 80 grand, you got health insurance, got everything. That person in 2026 with $4,000 gold is only making 14 ounces. They only have 14 ounces of real purchasing power. So the median American today commands less purchasing power than the lowest tier worker in the 1900s.
In terms of gold.
In terms of gold, yes.
Now,
So, mhm.
why is it peak in 1970?
Well, 1971 is where so this kind of run up here, and it really started because in 1957, the United States gold reserves peaked. So when people say the 50s were the best time for Americans, I would say post World War II, that's true. So 1957, gold reserves peak. 1971, Richard Nixon takes us off Bretton Woods quasi gold standard because of the Great Society by LBJ, the
Israel.
Vietnam.
No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, hey, who knows? But but yeah, so the Great Society, the Vietnam War, I mean, even the Korean War in the 50s, but especially those later two things, that meant that, sorry, been battling a cold.
Oh, good.
So we had the Great Society spending guns and butter effectively, which meant that there was increasingly dollar liabilities accumulating overseas, right? Because even though we as Americans couldn't redeem our dollars for gold, foreign governments could. So by 1971, when Richard Nixon took us off, that's because, the game was up pretty much. Because when you're making a gold standard promise, how do you correct for the increased inflation or the increased outstanding liabilities? It's enforced through deflation or, which is redemption, right? And we were telling all the European countries, don't, please don't redeem your dollars. Like, we're good. Just stick with us or whatever. So effectively, instead of doing the right thing in 1971, which would be to say, hey, we're going to have to stop all these wars. We're also going to have to stop all these social programs. And we're going to have to go through a contraction and deflate so that we can, resume, so we can be stable again. But of course, that kind of, especially by this time, the early 70s, that is so politically unfeasible that nobody would do that. But there's examples. We had fiat currency during the Civil War, which was eventually extinguished because they turned redemption back on. And funny enough about that episode is that they accumulated, meaning the Treasury accumulated like $10 million in gold. So it's a lot of ounces because gold's $20 an ounce. They accumulated $10 million in gold for when they were going to turn redemption back on after the Civil War because they thought there was going to be a frenzy, like madness, you know. But when they did that, nobody actually showed up. So just the fact that the government was willing and showing that they were committed to sound money was enough for people to say, okay, I'll keep the paper in my pocket because paper is a lot easier to deal with on a day to day than gold coins. So that's fine as far as that goes. But just psychologically, the fact that the government was willing to resume and taking the stance meant that nobody really bothered to redeem. And actually, the day that they opened up redemptions again, they had net inflows. So they had net deposits,
Of
if you could
gold.
believe that. Well, no, they had net deposits of paper currency. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, so people weren't depositing gold and they weren't withdrawing gold.
I
They
see. I see.
actually
Because they
deposited
trusted.
more paper because they
Yeah.
trusted, right?
And so,
So
real quick,
yeah,
the price of gold changing per ounce is a function of what? Prior to what year did we go off the gold standard?
well, FDR took us off in 1933. It was fixed at 23.22 grains, which gave us a price of $20.67.
Okay.
And Richard Nixon took us off the Bretton Woods gold standard in 1971. That was at $35 an ounce, which is what, this drop in the graph right here in 1933. This drop to here is just FDR devaluing the currency from 21 to 35.
So they could print more dollars.
Right. Right. Well, back then for 1933, he ordered all citizens to turn in their gold at the old price. And then as soon as, that was all done, he said, okay, now gold's $35 an ounce. So now he took everyone's gold and then devalued the US dollar by 40% almost. So now this gold suddenly can purchase a lot more things. So that's what that drop is. But it's important to make this point that under a gold standard, we are not fixing the price of gold because that's what people think of it as. And then they think about, okay, well, then it's just an arbitrary kind of price fixing. Oh, you're a libertarian. You don't want the government to have fucking rent control and this and that, but you're okay with them fixing the price of gold. It's not fixing the price of gold. It's fixing the weight of the dollar. And that's a very important distinction. So the dollar was not or gold was not $20. The $1 was 23.22 grains of gold. It's a weight definition. It's
Yeah,
giving
yeah,
a
yeah.
weight to the paper.
Right, because price, it's not really a price of gold. It's the actual thing that gives it its value.
Right. Right. The dollar's only
Yeah, yeah.
value, you know, and we're the reserve
That makes
currency
sense.
right now, and that is only because after World War II, the dollar was the last remaining gold currency. That's where we got the trust to be the reserve currency, is because of that. So when people talk about, oh, we're the reserve currency, like people need dollars, it's like, no, they don't. And that's, go ahead, go ahead.
So after we went off the gold standard in 33,
Uh-huh,
so FDR took us off the gold standard in 33
uh-huh.
and then raised the price to 35.
Yes,
And then it stayed at 35 until,
1971.
and that's when we just got off the gold standard entirely.
Yeah, I mean, they tried raising the price from $35 to $42.22 as kind of like, oh, we know there's a little bit of inflation. We'll just kind of nudge the price a little bit, which is not nearly enough, by the way, because there was something called the London Gold Pool, which was trying to manage the international price of gold. I think that started in 1963 or 62, And by 1968, it collapsed. So the London gold pool completely collapsed. By 1971, the game was over pretty much. Like, I don't fault Richard Nixon for what he did because, I mean, the game was already up. Like, and nobody was going to deflate. Just like, oh, fun fact, by the way, um, during the interwar period from World War I to World War II, the Roaring Twenties, um, Britain went off the gold standard. Well, all countries did. The United States went back on pretty much immediately after. But Britain was off the gold standard. They went back on, but they tried to go back onto the gold standard at the pre-war price. And the reason that was a problem is because they printed a bunch of pounds, so they couldn't sustain the redemption window. So instead of Britain doing the right thing and saying, hey, we're going to have to stop all these social programs that we started during the war, we're going to have to deflate for a bit, get things back on track. Instead of doing that, what they did was they went to the New York Federal Reserve, which was led by Benjamin Strong at the time, and they basically colluded to say, hey, how about instead of us deflating, why don't you guys inflate your currency? And that way there's no outflow of gold from Britain to the United States, right? So they're trying to rig the rules-based game, which is, that's what the gold standard is. It's a which gets to my kind of other point that it's something not in this sense it is being managed, but in its best sense it's not managed because it's something that all the countries are participating in, kind of as this one game that's not beholden to any one country. So the United States and Britain trying to rig the rules of the game. So what did Benjamin Strong do? 1924, did a ton of QE. Well, it wasn't QE back then. It was just open market operations, whatever. So he did that in 1924, again in 1927. And so we have this roaring 20s, right? That's so great. And then what happens in 1929? Well, the same problem. There's too many claims outstanding in the American economy to support that price of gold. So it only took, a needle, which was a stock market crash, to pop the bubble. So gold gets blamed for that. But just that was just kind of a fun thing. Like,
Mhm.
isn't it funny how the greatest depression in American history was preceded by the greatest, you know, time in American history, the Roaring Twenties? It's like, no, that's not an accident. The Roaring Twenties is what caused the Great Depression, and gold gets blamed for that because it is imposing. It demands discipline from society. Um, so yeah, and then we go off in 1971. That's what this crash is. So during from 1970 to the early 1980s was decade of stagflation. So you had high unemployment, high inflation. So technically, and this isn't quite true because one, the actual dollar is not really stable at $35 an ounce before they took us off, and two, you couldn't actually own gold physically. But technically, an unskilled laborer in 1971 commanded 150 ounces of gold in purchasing power, and that was all destroyed by the beginning of the 1980s. So gold shot up from $35 to $600, which is a lot for back then. Like, you know, we would look at the 1980s now and be like, oh man, like how cheap are things back then compared to now? But if you were in 1980, you remember the 70s, which, I mean, you remember the 60s and how cheap things were back then. So this was a massive loss in the standard of living for Americans and real purchasing power. So it bottomed out at about 14 ounces of gold, or 31 ounces for the median wage earner with full benefits, about $20,000. So the bottom of the 1980s labor market economy is still better than where we're at right now by a significant degree. So it's like, yes, in one sense, we are richer than we ever have been. But then in another sense, we are losing our ability to have access to ownership, because
Mm.
inflation doesn't enter the economy evenly. Before the prices go up at McDonald's, the prices go up in the stock market, or they go up in housing. So we've we think that we've invented a better system that is capable of being managed and administered by a smart, group of people in the central bank or the board of economic advisors or whatever. We've traded the natural stability and discipline of gold for administration, and we've been losing real purchasing power the entire time for over 100 years. For over 100 years. Okay. Um,
Um,
Go ahead.
okay, this is good. Let me take real quick, two,
Yeah.
3 minute break. I'm gonna run to the restroom. So I've followed everything so far, and it is interesting. I'm seeing this is not, I mean, I studied, I learned about, monetary system and Federal Reserve banking, all this stuff in school and in college, and so I have the basics to be able to interpret all the information through.
Hmm.
Um, and the whole point about purchasing power in terms of per ounce um, has decreased. That
Yes.
makes the Chevy Impala, like for 70 ounces of gold, now it's 10 ounces of gold, and yet we're paying more. And so wealth has increased, but we've been locked out of the ability to extract the same proportion of wealth. And so we're actually
Yes.
screwed even more because the people closest to the money printer are the ones accumulating all the gains, or the majority of the gains.
Right. So, which goes into my thing about like, well, if you want to be a socialist, it's like, if you consider yourself somebody who advocates for the worker, in that sort of lens, then really you should be advocating for a gold standard, because
See, I'm in favor of that.
well, good.
Well, and so this is if I because just to because I had the everyone hates capitalism and that's good. Really, what that comes down to is defining what do we mean by capitalism, because it's such a vague and amorphous word.
Right.
Because if you mean free markets and a gold standard, I support those things. When I talk about capitalism, my it's more the philosophical underpinnings of everyone is a rational actor, and
Hmm.
individual economic liberty is of primary importance.
Hmm.
That's what I question.
Right.
And like, is it would you still consider it capitalism if we're off the gold standard?
If it was freely chosen, the problem is it
Which it's
wasn't.
not. No, 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 yeah. So in today's world, you regard it as capitalist in the United States.
Only insofar as that we have private property. But
Fair. Well, this is my point of like what I could have easily have said is everyone hates the current economics. The word capitalism just means the current economic system.
right,
That's what that
which
word functionally means.
right, and I figured that's what you meant.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. Then in that sense, yeah, I hate capitalism too. But really, what we have is not capitalism. Um, and that's for all sorts of reasons, not just the monetary thing, but also regulations. Like for how horrible the conditions of factories were in the early 20th century, you still had people by the thousands, maybe even the millions, moving from Europe, moving from farms in the United States, moving into cities to go work in those terrible factories, because that was still a better life for them than being a subsistence farmer, out in the countryside.
True. Yeah. 100%.
So,
I don't doubt that. Um, Now, real quick, just so it's 2:25 now. I have this room only until 3, but since we started late and then I was in the bathroom for 10 minutes, I'll at 3 I'll leave the room, go to my table, which is fine. You can take calls up there, and we'll go till like 3:20, 3:30.
yeah, sure, whatever
Cool.
works for you. Yeah.
Okay. Now then, my question is: do you want to continue? Is there a thread you want to continue to go down,
Um,
or do you prefer I ask my disparate questions all over?
I'll just close it out with this, I guess, as far as like the actual specific economic babble or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, let me see. Well, I guess like because what I argue in the Schism of Vienna is that not only is gold superior economically, but it also corresponds symbolically and psychologically with um, deeper truths, I guess. So it's like, how does gold relate to Jesus Christ?
That was good. So that was going to be one of my questions is, okay, so now how does this relate to God,
Yeah,
the
right,
nature of God?
right. So, um, and we'll see if I can put this all together. But
Yeah.
in the Schism of Vienna, like I go through like the actual symbolism. Where is it? So gold
Yeah.
is like,
Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, just real quick from
go
your
ahead.
summary, because I just want to. Is William of Ockham involved in this?
Peripherally. So I would
Peripherally.
say
Okay.
like he is the articulator of the fracture that was already underway. So he's not a cause, but
Got it. Okay.
he's a recognizer of what's
Of the
happening.
of the particulars versus universal distinction, right? And nominalism and
Yes.
all this.
Yes.
Got it.
So the way this relates to, God is that, well, what kind of society values constraint, values discipline, um, and all those sort of things that are associated with gold versus the kind of society that values, uh, the will, I guess, because that's really what fiat currency is. It's the assertion that the state has the power to create claims upon reality and that those claims are in of themselves justified. So that's not limited to the monetary register, that goes into the broader talks about culture. Um, so the way that gold relates to Christ, um, and there's a long history. Like the sun was, or I think, is considered like the first god, I guess, for ancient people. It's the thing that sustains the earth. It's the thing that um, gives light to the moon. It's a symbol of permanence and objectivity, um, and sight, intelligibility. And gold, obviously, I guess it's yellow as far as that goes, like the sun, but even its properties, like its physical properties, gold is uncorruptible. So people find gold from shipwrecks from the 1400s. You pull it out of the water, it looks just like it did 600 years ago, right? So it's permanent, it's incorruptible, it's a distinguished thing. And likewise, you need something that's objective, independent, to make proper calculations in the economy. But also, as far as like culture, like we have an inflation of meaning today. So, and that's where I guess the third book comes in, is like, if you're talking with somebody and you know you're telling them your problem or whatever, they're telling you their problem, and all you can really do is like, if you're responding to that, all you can really do is assert like what you subjectively prefer, I guess. So there's no external moral authority anymore that gives that kind of conversation a sort of weight and an anchoring, right? So that's where we get all this, shitty like therapeutic speak about mental health and this and that. It's just, to me, that is fiat currency for psychology.
Hmm.
Um, that's the same thing to me, because the kind of society who thinks like that is the kind of society that values paper currency, that values the state and the will of the state above, the world, I guess. Um, so how gold relates to God? Well, through Plato, he talks about in the Republic. He says, "For there, the sun is all the stars, and every star is the sun and all the others, but the sun dominates." And then Plotinus from the Enneads, "The sun, by his unifying power, leads all things back to the one." Um, oh, sorry, that was Julian the Emperor, the last pagan Roman emperor. That was a hymn to King Helios. So there's this long association of the sun with God the Father or the Creator, and it's for those reasons that I was saying. It gives intelligibility to the world. It gives us light, and gold serves that same function economically.
Mhm.
So, which is why it's important that gold was not created by a committee, you know, 2,000 years ago, saying, okay, we're going to be on a gold standard. It was something. There are things that are intrinsic to gold that reflect the properties of reality, or to a deeper reality, I guess. So to me, it's not a question first about economics, which is, I guess, the overall point of this book series, is to say that no, economics is not a separate thing. So when you say, I'm pro moderate social conservatism and I'm pro left wing economics, to me it's like, well, the thing that gives you the ability to say that you're pro social conservatism is undermined by affirming an allegiance
Mm.
with left wing economics fundamentally.
One of the nice things about being a adherent of the Petersonian tradition is I'm always entitled to say, depends on what you mean by left wing economics.
Yeah.
Because when I
Yeah.
say left wing economics, I'm referring to the central left wing economic critique is wealth inequality.
Hmm.
And that's what I'm sympathetic to, not endless social programs or a particular commitment to a monetary system.
Hmm.
It's wealth inequality, and also just pushing back against the hyper rational individual, the allegedly hyper rational individual.
Right. Which I will say Austrian economics is not dependent on. Neither is it dependent on the rational individual, as far as like
Okay.
mainstream economics, describes individual agents. Um, so rationality for Mises just means that people will only exert energy to change the state of affairs into something that they more highly prefer. So whatever that is, to Mises, is rational. Now,
See, that's
you,
the issue. Like
mhm.
heroin addict.
Right. Well, and that's where I bring in Jung, because for Mises, in order to make praxeology a valid science, he explicitly bracketed off the underlying psychological motivations, metaphysics. He called that domain thymology, meaning the why of things, and where praxeology just says this is the necessary logical structure of human action under scarcity. So yes, for Mises, like the heroin addict is rational, and I would agree with you that practically he's not, which is why I brought in Jung to give you, well, to give me, um, that extra layer that Mises purposely bracketed off, because
You say
yeah,
bracketed off. What do you mean bracketed off? Like he ignored or
well, he deliberately isolated praxeology from psychology, from metaphysics, from that domain, because for him praxeology is strictly a priori. So praxeology just means that, like what I said, people will choose certain means towards ends that they subjectively seem prefer as desirable. So you would not do anything unless you thought that by doing that thing would bring you a state of affairs that's more desirable than what.
Yeah, this is the Peterson. You can't act without a value hierarchy, and the
Yes. Yes.
action implies a valued goal or
Yes.
something you value.
So for Mises, he just took that as a fact, and he said, I'm not going to get into the
Right.
why, because
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the why contaminates the objectivity of the structure of action.
Yes. I guess this would be my fundamental issue with Mises then.
Hmm.
And so real quick,
Well,
is
me too.
praxeology? Yeah, fair. Well, that's why you got to bring in, like you said, Jung. Is
Hmm.
praxeology a term we get from Mises?
Yes, that is his term specifically.
So when Marxists speak of praxis, they're borrowing from Mises, or does praxis precede praxeology?
Um, I don't think that they would have gotten it from Mises. I believe Marx was already publishing before, like, the theory of money and credit in 1912. So I don't think it's the same thing. Let me see, praxis. No, it's not the same thing.
Okay, so praxeology and praxis sound the same, but they're different.
Yes.
Or is praxeology just that's not unique to Mises?
As far as I know, his term is unique. As far as the prefix of praxis, I wouldn't say that's unique,
Okay,
but
got it.
praxeology is
Okay,
just he's trying to explain economic phenomena using logic and a priori axioms. So
gotcha. Okay,
for him, you can deduce the entire structure of, like, the economy, the business cycle, just from the one axiom that humans act to achieve preferred ends. And you can
yes.
disagree with that or not, but that's what he was doing. Um, so I share that discomfort that you do. Like, well, that doesn't sound good enough. And in one sense, it is good enough because it does explain the actual. It does explain to you the actual, like, unfolding of action under scarcity. So as far as that goes, that's true. But when we get to the why do people do certain things, well, he deliberately ignored that question or said that's not my domain. That's the domain
Yeah,
for psychology. So that's
it
where I
makes
bring in.
sense. Yeah, it makes
Mhm.
sense why he did it. But then
Right.
again, it's like, but then this is where it's a question of value of like, well, if we're all a bunch of pseudo heroin addicts because our minds have been warped and our values distorted, rationality does not equal good,
Right.
and we
Well,
shouldn't base our system on rationality per se. But
right. And I would agree with that. And that's why I bring in Jung, because even Jung himself, like, for how, mystical he was in the later parts of his career, you can imagine that being in the 20th century was probably the most unpopular time for any sort of religious talk or metaphysics, things like that. So even Jung himself, who Mises, if he had known him, would say that, this guy's a crank, mystic, whatever. Even Jung was concerned with being seen as an empiricist and having his psychology regarded as objective, as a science. So Jung is subject to that same kind of criticism, which I think he was trying to resolve in his later works with the answer to Job, um, and that sort of thing. Because if you take the archetypes seriously enough, then the question of Christ comes up. And for Jung, Christ was the embodiment of the realized self. So if the goal of individual life is to individuate, to integrate our shadow, things like that, if that's our goal, then Christ functionally is the one person who actually did that thing to its completion. Okay. Um, so when I look at that, it's like, well, it just seems obvious to me. So I'm going to try to make it obvious to you how that connects to gold. But um, let's see. Well, do you have any questions about that, or what are you thinking right now?
I have different questions in different domains. Actually, if I may,
Yes.
can you give me 1 minute to open up a tab
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to post a video today, and it was under review, and I thought I wouldn't be able to post it until tomorrow, but I just got notified that it's good, so I can just hit publish.
Yeah.
It's on Carmelo Anthony and um, some of the race stuff that's going on. So we'll see how that goes. 1 second here.
No worries.
Okay, forgive me. Like I said, we'll go till 3:30.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
There we go. Okay. My timestamps were completely fucked. Okay. This will be the video that gets me canceled. Just FYI.
All right.
So it may not be, I may not be significant enough in the future for this meme to spread, but I am interested. So, okay, so you asked me what questions I have. Well, I have questions in different areas. So I guess the most practical, because what you reached out, I posted that video. A sovereign wealth fund, does that conflict with this in any way?
Like in principle, the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, I don't know. I would say that in the suggested way for America being stake in artificial intelligence companies, I would say that's probably not great. Like, I don't really like that Trump purchased Intel stock on behalf of the United States, which also brings another question, like, what does that fund even do for the people? Like, technically, we all own Intel stock, but you're not going to receive a dividend in the mail. You're not going
Well,
to.
the principle, the idea would be you own a stake in the companies, and then the earnings get redistributed by the government.
Okay, so earnings redistributed, which is, I would say that is solved by itself with a gold standard, because under a gold standard, the earnings are redistributed to everybody through falling prices. So, oh, I'm out of focus, but so under a gold standard, if there's a, let me say this, if we had a gold standard right now and artificial general intelligence came tomorrow, what would happen? Well, we would have massive price deflation. So maybe we would deflate back to the level of things being pennies and nickels again, and things would be more or less fine.
But
But
that's a function
because,
of the massively increased productivity, right? So the
right,
deflation could occur even under a non-gold standard.
well, it could, but it won't. And why is that? Because we have enormous amounts of debt. And growth cannot offset the debt like how people say it can.
That's what David Friedberg's idea is. We'll
Yeah,
grow the
yeah.
debt or grow out the
And no,
deficit.
yeah, no, we're not going to grow out of the deficit. So in theory, yes, artificial intelligence could have massive deflation right now. But what would happen if we had massive deflation? Well, the reason people are against deflation, generally is that they say, well, it hurts debtors, which is true. Well, who's the biggest debtor in the world? It's the United States government. So they cannot allow massive deflation, even if it would benefit the people. because it would
Right,
unravel the, yeah,
because my understanding, the reason, the primary problem with deflation is that if I borrow money, I
yeah,
will owe more if it, in the future, if it deflates
in real terms, yes.
in real terms.
Right.
And
And
that's a worse problem than inflation.
I mean, if you're a debtor, but you think back to what was actually true 100 years ago, there wasn't that much debt. Like households did not have crazy amounts of debt. And why is that? Because if you want to save money, instead of taking out, a predatory loan, like we do now, everyone does with their credit cards, instead of doing that, you could actually put money, it's a meme, but you could put money under your mattress. And because of the gold standard, that would guarantee that it's going to be at least worth the same in 10 years. But it's actually going to be worth more because in that 10 years, society has progressed, technology has progressed. So the act of
I
saving,
see.
yeah, money has a rate of return if you want to think about it that way under a gold standard. But then people will say, well, why do you want why do you want your money to appreciate when you can just invest in the stock market? It's like, well, those are not the same things. Saving your money and investing are not the same things. Okay, one has
It's
risk.
yeah, and it's a further it's a further money distributed gains with money is egalitarian in that everyone benefits, whereas it's only the people who invested in the right companies that then benefit, and they benefit disproportionately.
Correct. Correct. So it works for some
Interesting.
people. So if you want to
Yeah.
think about it like this, like a universal basic income to me would be deflation through a gold standard. Because what's the purpose of universal basic income? To distribute purchasing power across everyone equally. People want to do that by printing money or whatever, but why would you have to do that if prices just fall? That's
That's
the
fair.
same
Okay,
thing.
so here's a question.
Hmm.
Here we are in 2026 on June 12th
Yes.
at 2:47 p.m. Central Standard
Uh-huh.
Time. Now we have the solution. The knowledge is in front of me.
Hmm.
What do we do going forward? What in your world? What is the proper path forward now for any for individuals, for governments? I mean, what do you
Well,
think? Actually, no. For you and I, let's say.
well, that's tough because the problem with the way things are set up now is that the ability to opt out of the current system has been systematically destroyed. So usually,
Bitcoin,
what
though.
Bitcoin has its own problems, which we'll see if we can get into that. But
Okay.
um,
I do want to talk about Bitcoin.
yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is like posed as like gold 2.0 or whatever.
Yeah.
But the problem with Bitcoin is that it's still uh, so in order to understand that, you have to understand the the regression theorem from Mises. So how does gold have purchasing power to begin with? Because at one point in history, gold was valued for itself before it was money. So as jewelry or whatever, it had a value, a subjective value attached to it before it could ever be money. So that's how you get out of the infinite loop of like of going back into history, because gold before it was money, it had a value. People wanted
Hence
it
the
for its own
archetype.
sake.
Yeah, it has
Yes.
psychological.
And
We can take it as a
Bitcoin,
primary, like food almost is valuable in and of itself as nutrition. It's like gold has something about that. There's no fiat with food.
yes.
Food
And
is consumed forever.
Bitcoin, although it's not subject to the expansion of its supply by, an issuing authority, it's still a fiat currency in that sense, is in that it's like technically, and I'm not discounting network effects and that sort of thing, but there's just because there's 21 million Bitcoin, like there could be, 15 million of a new Bitcoin in 30 years. And what's the difference really? The difference is just the protocol, but there's nothing like nobody wants,
Psychologically about it. There's nothing
yes, there's
archetypal
nobody
about
that
it.
wants Bitcoin for its own sake other than to either they think it's going to go to $1 million and they're going to hold on to it, or they're going to sell it to somebody else. So there's nothing, and I'm not trying to say that there's something inside gold, like physically, like a property that we could look through, a microscope and say, oh, here's the value. That's not what I mean. But
There is some of that with electrical conductivity in manufacturing things,
oh well,
but
sure, yeah,
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
But
I get your point.
but I would say Bitcoin's closer to a fiat currency than it is to a commodity like gold.
Okay,
So
so two questions.
yes,
Are you invested in gold and or Bitcoin?
I have no Bitcoin. I do have gold, yes, and silver.
Is that where you put most of your savings?
I mean, yes, because I'm a firm believer in the decline of America. So, I mean, if I was going to buy equities, I would probably buy foreign stocks, like companies that actually make things. Because, well, the reason that we have the standard of living we do right now is because the world has been, meaning foreign governments, have been willing to play this game with us of you buy our treasuries, we buy your stuff, and then you take that and invest in our financial markets, whatever. So it's just this kind of cyclical, you know, money game, just going back and forth. Um, but and that works, up until a point, and that point is when these other countries start experiencing their own inflation, right? So like the Bank of Japan, who was our largest creditor, they're having their own inflation problem. So what are they going to have to do? That means the Bank of Japan is going to have to buy their own treasury bonds to suppress the interest rates, to suppress, you know, um, inflation, which means that they're not going to have that money to buy our treasuries, which means that yields are going to spike on our end, and we can't afford that because we have $40 trillion in debt. So what's our Federal Reserve going to do in response to that? They're going to create more inflation, do QE, buy back our own treasuries. So it works until it doesn't, pretty much. And it's like, well, how do things collapse? It's very suddenly and then all at once. It's like, I don't want to be in the crossfire of all at once. Now, you'll say that and people will be like, well, if that's what you think is going to happen, then you should be loading up on fucking bullets and food. It's like, well, it's not going to be Mad Max. Like
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
little over dramatic.
There's degrees of collapse.
Yes, like civil society is not going to collapse because the United States can no longer, you know, bully the world with our reserve currency. What's going to happen is that the United States standard of living is going to collapse, and by extension, the rest of the world is going to see an increase in their standard of living. Um, I lost where I was going. What was the question?
No, no, no. Well, I was asking about gold and Bitcoin and if you're invested and why and
Yeah.
all
So,
that.
so, so yeah, if I was going to invest in equities, I would invest in foreign countries, companies that can produce actual things that give dividends. But for me, I'm comfortable just holding on to gold for now because, I have a liquid cash savings for emergencies, but as far as the long term, I really don't see a case where like we will have the 2010 to 2020 bull run, or really from 1980s to 2020, we just had a massive bull run in the stock market. I don't think we're going to see anything like that again. So for me, equities are a little too risky.
Well, so I mean, so far, I mean, I know you. I mean, obviously, you've got 480 pages. How long have you spent from the day you put the first word on the page? How long has it taken you to produce these books?
Well, I've tried like making like little short articles, not published anywhere, just kind of myself mapping out the territory, I guess. Um, it's taken me over a year. So, but the
That's
scheme of,
it?
yeah,
I would have thought like 5 or 10 years or something to write these
yeah.
460-page things. How old are you again? Remind me.
Uh, I'll be 28 next month.
Okay, yeah, basically the same age. Yeah.
Basically, how old are you?
I'll be 30 in
All right,
6 months.
yeah, we're not the same age. Okay.
Okay, okay. I'm still in my 20s for now. I
For
consider
now,
29.
yeah.
Yeah, you'll get, dude, 28. Wait till you turn 29. Things will, the time just continue. It's like you said, it happens slowly and then all at once. It's like once you get to a certain point, time just starts going. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
um, well, so actually, what time is it? Let me move so don't get bothered by someone. So one of the things, I guess, I mean, because I see the basic outline. I mean,
Hmm.
right? Because you've got Jung and Freud breaking, where Freud takes this left brain, everything is reduced to this material drive,
Hmm.
and he's saying, no, there's a deeper, more right hemispheric fundamental drive.
Hmm.
The financial. So I understand that. Okay, so 1913 was when they got off the gold standard. So
That was the creation of the Federal Reserve.
Creation Federal Reserve.
The beginning of the end, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then how does Vienna come into this?
Oh, well, that's
Vienna
because
is Freud and Jung?
well, yes, but Mises also spent a lot of time in Vienna, so it's just kind of a fun play on words. But yeah, Freud and Jung out of Vienna, yes.
I see. Okay. Now, what is your belief about these things are tied together, like synchronistically, or because one didn't lead to another, or was it like reflective of a?
No, they're not. It's not causal, so I'm not
Yeah.
saying that either one caused the other. I'm saying that both of these fractures, so the psychological fracture and the monetary fracture, are really the same thing happening in two different levels of reality. And what is that same
Mm-hmm.
thing? That kind of ties back into the nominalism thing. But it's about whether value is something that is created and administered, or is value something that is recognized and something that precedes the individual person. And how does that tie into God and all of that? Well, well,
But no,
because
I mean you've explained it, yeah, yeah, or at least you've alluded to it. It's
okay, okay,
because if Christ is the ultimate, individuated person, that is the real historical actual manifestation of the archetype.
yes,
Um, and so if you have faith in Christ, you have faith in the reality of an archetype. And by that, same line of logic, it's like, well, do you view the archetype of gold as, do you take it with the same level of seriousness of like, well, if I have faith in Christ and I have faith in the manifestation of the archetype, well, we should have faith in there's something about gold. It's like, that is valued
right,
and has psychological potency in and of itself
hmm,
versus, uh, oh, Jesus was just a guy who had some good ideas. Well, gold is just a thing that we, pegged our thing to, and it's all fiat or whatever. I get that
yes.
parallel. And so I guess my question is, there's 460 pages of stuff. Well, that's just the first book, right? So
That's
what's
just
all?
that's just the first book, yes. And like I said at the beginning, originally I wrote the first book to kind of be complete on its own. So I kind of do a little history portion. Then I go through of why like the thermodynamics and the physics of why fiat currency doesn't work, why gold works, and not necessarily gold, but just like a commodity, because commodity has constraints. Gold has a natural constraint being that you have to mine it out of the ground. It takes energy, it takes effort to get, which means it has to be profitable to get it out of the ground. So gold is situated like it's embedded in the reality of being a finite human being, if that makes sense. Um, but as far as like how many pages, well, because the later parts of the book, I go through like the symbolism of gold and silver, like gold Christ, the sun, silvers like the church, the moon. I get into like some alchemical stuff in that section. And then I close the book with like what it would take exactly to restore the original gold standard today. Just kind of like an imaginative exercise, and it would take a lot. It would take a lot to go back to the original gold standard, but
Well, we
it's
got off it. So,
right. Well,
but
we got off of it after the Civil War. We got back on it, right? So, and that's because there was enough of the older population at that time who were still embedded in the old ideas of the world, where it's like, no, we have a duty. And I think this was I forget his name, but the treasurer at the time, he said something like, America is only as good as the promises we make. So if we made a promise to redeem gold at this price, then, I would rather have all of our volts drained out than to go back on that promise. And that's because that kind of thinking is still embedded in this older system, which is, because I know one of the other things you're talking about is what is it to be an American? And the American experiment for me was not a new way of manufacturing law or manufacturing like institutions of the state. What makes America unique is that its founding was predicated on the idea that there is a structure, there is a reality that precedes the political congregation, that precedes the individual will. And what America, in its best sense, is trying to do is to say, you know, that thing, that is the basis for a stable society. That, our rights are endowed to us by our Creator, all men are created equal. That whole line comes from that older way of thinking, I think, which is, so if you ask, well, what is it to be an American? To me, if you don't believe that, then you're not an American, because then it gets to the problem of like, okay, well, what determines like the identity category? Is it what the people at the time say they are, or is it about what the founders did and the continuity of that way of thinking? So for me, that's true. Like, you have to believe that to be an American. Likewise, what is valid? What is a valid deviation or evolution of Christianity? I would say that it's up to the schism of 1054. And so, no shade on anybody personally, but I don't think Baptists really are real Christians, and
me
Protestants,
neither.
right, right,
I'm starting to. It's one of those things where you see the same phenomenon crop up in multiple different places where you don't expect it, and which gives it some validity.
yeah,
And increasingly, the idea that the Protestant Reformation was one of the worst mistakes ever made, it just keeps cropping up in all these places. And I'm like, I think there's probably some truth to that.
yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. And same thing, like, for Judaism, like, I would say that Jews today are not remotely the same Jews that existed 2,000 years ago. Because for me, the purpose of Judaism was for, as they say, the Messiah to come and all this. For me, and for, I believe, Orthodox Christians or Catholics or whatever, that old covenant was fulfilled through the actions and life of Christ. So the moment Christ died on the cross and resurrected was the exact moment that Old Testament Judaism was no longer an available category for a religion for me. So everything else after that, meaning the creation of the Talmud, rabbinic Judaism instead of Torah Judaism, to me that's not the same thing. So it's like, well, what constitutes an identity? It's not just saying, oh, I'm a Christian or I'm an American or I'm Jewish. It's like, to what degree are you deviating from the founding, principles, doctrine, of the original thing? And the continuity is important. So it's not only that, because if you just say it's only the founders, well, then that means real Christianity died with the apostles, but it's not really true, because the European world was still unified under that framework up until 1054. So it's the founders, but it's also the continuity of that identity. So for me, what is an American is the same thing. And then here, do you have any questions? I kind of
Yeah,
think.
well, yeah, I mean, by publishing this book, who have you run this stuff by? Aside from me.
I've posted in the Discord. I've gotten a couple people who, responded,
But
but
outside of, I mean,
nobody,
why?
because this is the first opportunity. I guess this is what was presented in front of me. Is like,
No, hell yeah. No. I'm glad you did. No, I'm glad you did this. That's great. I'm asking you, like, have you not like reached out to economics professors or various people,
oh, I mean,
via email or something?
I've emailed people at my local university about the first book. But the problem with it is that the way that the first book is written, so modern academics, it's very compartmentalized.
Mhm.
So if you read this book and you gave it to an economics professor, he would say, "This is not economics." And
Yeah,
then
that's fair.
right,
Which it's not economics in the way we classically understand it, but it's philosophy, certainly.
right. So I could probably give it to like a philosophy department, but I mean, I've tried, but for me, it's like, well, I'm gonna write this whole series. I'm still working on the fourth book, and then I'll publish it, and then once it's done, then it's out there for anybody who's kind of like me and they're not satisfied with the other explanations of why things are the way they are, and they get this book or all four books and they read it and it resonates with them, then that's really all I can do. So I'm
Well,
not.
hold on. Okay, so let me think out loud for
Yeah.
a minute here, uh, because this is now the portion where I now offer you something, even though you paid to be able to give me this, which I'm getting double the value out of, like I said, so I can return some of it now. Um, Again, actually, the idea, everything you've presented to me, is sound. It makes sense. It's
Oh, that's
not
good.
schizo babble,
That's
which
good. I was worried
there are
about that.
many. Well, there are many people who will send me schizo babble. This is not that. So you have a cohesive idea here, even if I don't, I only know the very high level outline. So now your job is to spread these memes. You've engineered a powerful, useful, effective meme. So now you're in the process of spreading the meme.
Hmm.
That is a different game now than just identifying the truth. Now you have to spread the truth.
Yes.
So if you finish out the series and you just put it online someplace, it will never be found.
Hmm.
Okay, that is not good. If I were you, what I would do is, part of the value of writing a book like this, and I'm learning this now with the applied sociology book that me and my friend are writing, um, is it's from and you have this already. I'm working on it. You have from start to finish a complete logical train of thought from like first principles, and then you can answer. Then you can, first principles to conclusion or action or whatever, and then anytime you're thinking about it, you can just plug in wherever along that spectrum from first
Hmm.
principles to the actual particulars. What that enables you to do now is spin off 100 different one-off articles, commentary on different points that take your underlying theory and now apply it and manifest it in a bunch of different ways.
Hmm.
And I think you should do that. Like, I mean, I'll just tell you, I didn't read, when you sent me the PDF and it's like, all right, this is 460 pages. I simply do not have
I
time.
understand.
Even, I mean, I don't read books that are 460 pages long by people who I really, really like and admire.
Of
Uh,
course.
so if you were to, I mean, like, we covered a decent amount in 2 hours, but like, you could easily write a Substack of just aligning basically the archetype, like what is the archetype of gold? That alone could just be its own, like each chapter could be its own thing or something like that. And, getting
Yeah,
these
I
out
did.
in chunks can then bait people in to then, identify the underlying theory.
Mhm. No,
What do
you're
you think
right.
about it?
I mean, yeah, I I probably should do that. I don't know, and part of that is because I don't, you know, for all that I've written, I don't really know what I'm doing. I guess I don't know.
Well, Eric, I have some news for you. Nobody knows what they're doing, especially
Well,
not the people in charge, especially the ones who took off the gold standard, for example. And yet,
of course.
but go ahead. Sorry, you're saying.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I probably should do that. I've written a few articles on my Substack or whatever, um, kind of focusing specifically on, the symbolism of gold and that sort of thing. But I don't know. It it's like part of the reason why I wrote this book as well was just to get it out of my head, if that makes sense. Because, I just sitting with all these things all the time, it's like, well, if I put it in a book and then it's separate from me and I can just kind of leave it be.
Yeah, it's all tangled up in your mind, and when you put it out there, you can untangle it, and then there's relief from that.
Yes, yes. So, but no, you're probably right that, I should try to
Because I'm
spread
just
the meme
thinking, I mean,
more.
well, I mean, first off, there are no shortage of people who are pro gold standard, pro libertarian, and all that. So you
Sure.
have an endless number of places. I mean, just reflecting how I grew my channel. I started by posting videos on the Jordan Peterson subreddit and like
Mhm.
intellectual and stuff like that. It's like if you wrote a good article, just the archetype of gold, like one of the things that people don't realize about the gold standard is that it has archetypal significance. And just give me kind of the overview of what you went through now. And you might maybe you have a chapter that does exactly that, but like in a Substack form,
Yeah.
and share that and post that to places where people who like would agree with you can then use your ideas of the art more effectively.
Yeah. And I agree. And that's where it's kind of ironic because the people who are probably most, you know, theoretically receptive to what I'm arguing for are also the people who will maximally discard the symbolism because
True. Autistic people, yes, correct.
because libertarianism, which I agree with you in
Extremely,
its current, yes, yeah,
yes, it's very much a left brain phenomenon. But that's the point is if you explain right brain concepts in the language of left brainedness,
right, yes,
that,
that's what I'm,
that's a
yeah,
I mean my video, like the ones where like everyone who disagrees with me is autistic.
yes,
It's like so many autistic people said, I love this video. That's so great because you're using a very logical. So it's like you could be doing that. And you could even, the challenge could be how, if given that these people are very left brained, how can I explain it in the most left brain way to illustrate the value of vibes?
mhm. Yeah. Now there's definitely some utility in that, and I'll likely do that. Um,
Yeah, because what I'll say is, so I have a second channel where
mhm,
I didn't post on a while. It's called Clips and Extras. I'm going to post this conversation and a few other conversations there because I would like this to be publicly accessible. At minimum for you, you can reference it, push back and go for explanations.
mhm.
Um, but I mean, just admit this is not this like for example, like from this is not directly relevant to like I my like it's hard for me to fit this into something that I would put on my channel, right?
Right.
Um, I mean, some of the stuff like the archetype of gold and all that. I mean, you're arming me with stuff that I can make reference to in the future when discussing economics.
Good.
Um,
That's what I was hoping for, at least a little bit.
yeah, for sure. But there there are ideological factions that are starved for this kind of new take because they're all autistic and they need something that's a little bit more like well, the archetype of gold, what it reflects,
Mhm.
and stuff. And if you just concise in a Substack, like it somewhere, I mean, it's just like hit those subreddits, hit those spaces or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. Yeah, and you probably wouldn't believe me, but I'll just say and I'm not exaggerating. I think
Go
I'm
ahead.
0 or the first percentile in conscientiousness. So extremely low,
Okay, nice.
extremely low. Um, so yeah,
Well, here
I
you
have
are
I
writing
have
a
to.
460-page book, so that's that shows how much you care about it.
Well, yeah, because I had to, or
Yeah,
I was compelled to.
because all of your personality biases would have said, "Don't do this," and yet you still did it anyway.
Yes. So no, I definitely agree with you though. I do need to do that other kind of more bite-sized information kind of medium. Um, so I will be working on that. It's just a funny thing because yeah, it's usually I don't want to do anything. So, um, but no, you're right. You're right. There's definitely people out there who are you know hungry for a new take on things, and I wouldn't even say that I have a new take. I think for me, I think I've
Connected
just
things.
taken one piece that was disconnected from everything else, which is the economics, and plugged it back
Yeah,
into
I
the
mean,
theology.
so there. Okay, so now you have two entire ideological domains. You have two factions: gold standard libertarian type people, and then also the Jungians
Hmm.
who are interested in this type of stuff. They're going to get a, they, I don't know what the economics is not a union thing, but it's like, hey, we're applying union theory to economic concepts. This makes sense. Just preface it with like, this is not libertarian propaganda per se. This is more of a psychological analysis of things. But
Hmm.
anyway, yeah, I think, and I say subreddit. It sounds kind of cheeky, but it's like that is how I got traction initially. There's
Yeah.
like places, they're interest aligned places. I'm sure there's other subreddit trips other places as well, like Discord or something like that. But
Well,
this has been helpful.
I'll say that I'm more persuaded, I guess, to go do that now that I've had this talk with you because
Yeah.
I have not really had anybody to bounce any of this off of who could actually take it for what it is, I guess. Because I write these books and my family sees I'm like, oh my God, you wrote a book. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. And like, oh,
That's how
that's
my dad. That's how my dad is with. When we're
you're
writing a
right.
book, and
Right.
he's
And
like,
I
okay,
appreciate that, obviously, but it's like, that's not really
yeah, of course,
helpful, I guess. So, but
okay, good,
after this, I'm more motivated to do that. So I will.
good. I mean, I've certainly benefited from. And again, I'm evaluating what you've told me, not your book, so I can't speak to like the pros and all that. I mean, I'm interested. You sent me the PDF, so I'm gonna look at the archetypal section and all that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, um, I believe we're coming up on 2 hours. This has been helpful for me. Is there anything that you want to cover right
Um,
now, or
no, not that we could reasonably wrap up, in a short amount of time. I would
no?
say that, you know, if you'd like, I'd like to do this again. Because we did cover a decent amount, but like I said in the message to you, I think we're barely getting to now we can actually have the conversation, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So what, like, without going into it, but what in a sentence or two or a list of things, what are the other topics that fit into this? Other
Um,
than like just because I'm sure your book goes into detail kind of proving like laying out the evidence for this, the
mhm.
overall thesis. But if I kind of on the face of it, I'm like, this thesis makes sense to me. So are there implications of it? Like what
Well,
things
just
are still to be covered?
stuff like the things that are covered in book 3, which is it's kind of a phenomenological book. So I go through 16 different practices that were, maybe present in the medieval older world. So there's stuff like the perpetual stew, the pilgrimage, building cathedrals, and so all these different aspects of like communal
Okay.
relation and showing how the modern way of thinking not only is it blind to a lot of this stuff, but it actively disintegrates when it's tested against it. So it's like you don't make a rational economic calculation when you have to bury a family member, you know. And it's not to make like a nostalgic claim like, oh, things were better back then, because everything has its shadow side. So yeah, it's basically saying, because the idea of the series is that there is a reality. I use the term constitutive order. There's a thing that's prior to human intervention and human action that, one, it is constraining, it is oppressive in that sense, in terms of like, well, if you're coming from a liberal maximum freedom kind of hyper individualist thing, that would be a restriction for you. But that is also the thing that generates like a cohesive community. So
Okay, no, yeah. As soon as you said,
Like building the cathedral, and like, okay, I see, we're tying now
mhm.
the particulars of religious practice now to more practical things. Okay.